James Harrison, the CEO of one of the world's most successful companies, had built his empire on ambition and control. But when he stumbled upon a small girl in a park, injured and scared, he had no idea that his world was about to change forever. As he helped her up, he never imagined that the woman rushing toward them would be someone from his past, someone he had long forgotten. The moment their eyes met, the truth hit him like a wave: the little girl was his daughter, and he had never even known she existed. James Harrison had always been a man who controlled everything in his life. As the CEO of a global tech company, his days were filled with back-to-back meetings, financial reports, and decisions that shaped not only his future but the future of thousands of employees. The idea of being distracted by anything personal had always seemed like a weakness. He believed success came with focus, and he had honed that focus for years, pushing away any notion of a family, relationships, or anything that might pull his attention away from his goal of being the best in his field. That morning, however, something interrupted his usual routine. He had just finished his early morning run through the park, a habit he kept to clear his head before the day's work started. He always appreciated the quiet of the park at that time, before the city truly woke up, when the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the soft thud of his footsteps. But today, something was different. As he jogged along his usual route, he saw a little girl stumbling in front of him. Before he could process what was happening, she tripped over a tree root, and James immediately stopped, rushing to her side. She had fallen hard on the ground, her small hands skidding against the pavement. Her knees were scraped, and there was a slight bruise on her cheek. He crouched down beside her, his mind racing. She was scared, her big blue eyes filling with tears, but there didn't seem to be any serious injuries. "Are you okay?" James asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl sniffled and nodded, though her bottom lip quivered. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to be brave. James offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get you back on your feet." She hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. As she stood up, he helped her steady herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James gave her a reassuring smile. "No need to thank me. Just be more careful next time." As the girl steadied herself, James felt a strange tug in his chest. He didn't know why, but something about this little girl, her innocence and her vulnerability, stirred feelings in him that he hadn't experienced in years. He was a man used to taking charge of situations, not this, caring. But before he could think too much about it, a voice interrupted him. "Is she okay?" James looked up, his eyes meeting the woman who had just arrived, her expression one of obvious concern. She was in her early 30s, with long chestnut hair pulled into a neat ponytail, wearing a simple but elegant outfit. The moment their eyes met, James felt a flicker of recognition. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't quite place it. "Yes, she's fine," James said, standing up. "She just tripped a little, but no harm done." The woman exhaled, visibly relieved. "I'm so sorry about that. She's always running around like that, no sense of danger. Thank you for helping her." James nodded, still unsure where he had seen her before. "It was no trouble at all." The woman glanced down at the girl, who was now holding her hand, looking up at her with a quiet expression. James could see the obvious bond between them. This wasn't just any stranger. "I'm Laura," the woman said, extending her hand to him. James took it, still racking his brain. "James. It's nice to meet you." They stood in silence for a moment, and it felt like there was something left unsaid. As if there was a history they shared, but neither of them had voiced it. Laura looked down at the girl again. "Amelia, say thank you to the nice man." Amelia, still clutching her mother's hand, gave a small smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. James smiled back, then looked back at Laura. "You're welcome." But as Laura turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't just a random encounter. There was something about Laura, about Amelia, that felt like more than a coincidence. He watched them walk away, his mind swirling with questions, and for the first time in years, he felt a strange urge to reach out, to know more about them. It was a fleeting thought, but it lingered longer than he expected. For the next few days, James couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him after meeting Laura and Amelia in the park. It wasn't just the incident with the little girl that had made him stop and reflect, it was the way he had felt an unexpected pull toward both of them. He had always considered himself a man who had his life under control, who made decisions with precision and never allowed anything to distract him from his goals. But this was different. It was a Thursday afternoon when he found himself sitting at his desk, his mind wandering to that brief encounter. He had spent the last several years building an empire, moving through life with a single-minded focus on work, and yet, in the span of a few minutes, everything had changed. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him feel something so intensely without him even trying to understand why. It was like he had just seen a glimpse of something that had been missing from his life for years, but he couldn't quite place what it was. James picked up his phone and searched for Laura's name, trying to find any trace of her, anything that could explain why she felt so familiar. The search yielded no results. No social media profiles, no LinkedIn page, not even a public record of her. It was like she didn't exist in the digital world at all, and yet, there had been something in the way she had looked at him that sparked something deep within him, a reminder of something he thought he had left behind long ago. He tried to push it aside, telling himself it was just a fleeting encounter. He was busy. He had meetings, deadlines, projects that required all of his attention. Yet every time he sat down to work, his mind drifted back to the park, back to the way Amelia had looked up at him with those wide, bright eyes. How she had thanked him so quietly, so innocently. She reminded him of a time in his life he had long since moved past, his youth, his early relationships, his sense of adventure. A week later, as he was leaving his office late one evening, the thought of Laura and Amelia crossed his mind again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and searched for her address, knowing full well it was an impulsive decision. But something inside him urged him to act on it. He needed to know who she was, who they were, and why he couldn't forget that moment in the park. Laura's address wasn't far from the city center, tucked into a quieter neighborhood. As James drove through the streets, he found himself questioning what he was doing. He wasn't the kind of man who made spontaneous decisions, especially when it came to his personal life. But something felt like it was calling him forward, and as he parked the car in front of a small apartment building, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he wasn't prepared for. He took a deep breath, looking up at the building, before getting out of the car and walking toward the entrance. As he approached the door, he saw a light flicker in the window of the apartment on the second floor, and his heart began to race. What was he expecting? Was he even sure what he wanted out of this? He had no answers, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. James rang the doorbell and waited, his nerves tight in his chest. Moments later, the door opened, and Laura stood before him, her face soft but guarded. Her eyes widened with surprise, but she didn't immediately shut the door. "James," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "What are you doing here?" "I know this is unexpected," he began, his tone apologetic but sincere. "But I couldn't stop thinking about our meeting in the park. I realize it's strange, but I need to know more. I need to understand who you are, who your daughter is, and why I feel like there's something I'm missing." Laura hesitated, her gaze flickering to the side as though she was considering her options. She looked down at Amelia, who was standing just behind her, watching the exchange quietly. After a long moment, Laura stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. "We can talk, but only for a little while. Amelia is still young, and I'm not sure how much she can handle right now." James nodded, stepping into the apartment, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He was taking a step into unknown territory, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he could control the outcome. He was letting something bigger than himself take over, something he couldn't explain. The apartment was cozy and warm, decorated simply but tastefully. There were family photos on the walls, some of Laura and a younger Amelia, others that James assumed were from her childhood. He tried to ignore the way his heart ached at the sight of them. He didn't belong here, not yet. Laura led him to the living room and gestured for him to sit down. Amelia remained standing at the edge of the room, watching him with wide eyes. He couldn't help but notice how much she looked like him. The same sharp features, the same intensity in her gaze. He was certain now, she was his daughter. After a long silence, Laura spoke. "I didn't want this to happen. I never wanted to keep you from her. But I had to make a choice, James. I had to protect her." James swallowed hard, his mind reeling. "Protect her from me?" Laura's voice softened. "No, not from you. From the person you were back then. You weren't ready for her, James. You didn't want a family." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was right. He had been focused on his career, his ambition. And in doing so, he had lost years. He had missed out on the one thing that truly mattered. "Am I too late?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. "No one can answer that yet. But we can start now. It's up to you if you want to be part of her life." James nodded slowly, his chest tight with emotion. "I want to be." As he looked at Amelia, still standing by the wall, he realized that this was just the beginning. He didn't know how, but he was determined to make up for the time he had lost. He was going to be the father she needed, and he was going to do whatever it took to make things right. The following days passed in a blur for James. His thoughts were consumed by the meeting with Laura and Amelia, a whirlwind of confusion and longing. He had always been a man who liked control, who planned every step meticulously. But here he was, caught off guard, feeling an overwhelming mix of guilt and excitement. The image of Amelia's bright blue eyes haunted him at night. He hadn't expected to feel so much for someone he had just met, let alone someone who was his daughter. James was unsure of how to proceed. He knew that showing up unannounced at their home had been a bold move, and while Laura had agreed to let him stay and talk, he could sense her hesitancy. He couldn't blame her, he hadn't been there for years. How could he expect her to trust him now? But as he sat in his office, running through his usual lists of meetings and deadlines, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just turned upside down. It was late one afternoon when he finally decided to call her again. He had to. He needed to know if there was a chance for him to be a part of their lives. He couldn't just walk away, not now that he knew the truth. His daughter was out there, and he had spent years not knowing her. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could build something in the present. The phone rang twice before Laura answered, her voice quiet and unsure. "James," she said, "is everything okay?" "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day," James began. "I want to meet Amelia again, and I need to know how we move forward from here. I understand that this is complicated, but I want to be involved in her life. I don't want to make any more mistakes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and James could almost hear Laura's thoughts running through her head. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "James, you don't understand what it's like. I've been raising her on my own. I've protected her from everything that could hurt her. And now you want to step in and be a part of it all, just like that. It's not that simple. I know it's not simple. And I'm not asking for everything at once. I just want a chance. A chance to show her I'm here, that I can be the father she deserves. That I can be someone she can count on." There was silence again, and James waited, his heart pounding. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice quieter. "Okay. But I need time. You can see her. We can start small, but don't expect me to just trust you right away. It's going to take time for both of us to figure this out. But I will let you meet her." James breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you. I promise I won't let you down." The next few days were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He found himself pacing around his apartment, trying to plan what he would say to Amelia, how he would approach this monumental shift in his life. He had no script, no guide to tell him how to navigate being a father to a child he had just met. But one thing was clear, he was determined to make things right. When the day finally arrived, James could barely contain his nerves. He stood in front of Laura's apartment door, his hands clenched at his sides. He had brought a small gift for Amelia, a book he thought she might enjoy, something simple but thoughtful. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Laura opened the door, looking hesitant but not entirely surprised. She stepped aside to let him in, and James immediately noticed how Amelia was sitting on the couch, her attention on a puzzle she was working on. She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "Hi, Amelia," James said softly, unsure of how to approach her. She gave him a small smile, her blue eyes studying him curiously. "Hi." Her voice was quiet, but there was a sense of calm in it that made him feel like he wasn't quite as out of place as he feared. "I brought you something," he said, holding out the book. "I thought you might like it." Amelia looked at the book, then up at him, her small fingers reaching out to take it. She didn't say anything, but her soft expression told him more than words could. She took the book and sat down on the floor, flipping it open without a word. James watched her, feeling a strange sense of pride, despite the uncertainty that still lingered in the air. It wasn't a perfect start, but it was a start nonetheless. He sat down next to Laura on the couch, the space between them filled with unspoken tension. He wasn't sure what to say next. It felt like there were a million things he needed to express, but nothing seemed to come out right. Laura turned to him, her face softening. "She's quiet, but she's very smart. It takes time for her to warm up to people, especially after everything she's been through." "I understand," James said, nodding. He looked over at Amelia, who was now focused on the book, her face lit with concentration. "I'm not going anywhere," he added softly. "I want to be here for her, and for you, if you'll let me." Laura studied him for a long time, as if searching for the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded, just slightly. "We'll see, James. But this is a long road, and I can't promise you it'll be easy. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And right now, I don't know if you've earned it." James nodded, accepting the challenge. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when he had finally found the family he didn't even know he had. He was determined to make things right, no matter how long it took. The days that followed were a strange blend of hope and hesitation. James spent his time reflecting on his decision to step back into the lives of Laura and Amelia, trying to gauge where he stood with them both. He knew he couldn't undo the years he had missed, but that didn't mean he couldn't start now. He was determined to make amends, to prove that he was ready to be the father he had once abandoned. But each day he spent with them felt like a new challenge, one where he had to earn their trust all over again. The first few meetings were awkward, as expected. He and Amelia spent more time in silence than in conversation. She was a quiet child, not shy, but reserved. She had the same keen eyes as Laura, constantly observing everything around her, but her expressions remained neutral. James didn't know how to break through that wall. He wasn't used to being uncertain, especially when it came to personal relationships. One afternoon, after picking Amelia up from school, James suggested they go to the park. It had become a routine, the three of them meeting for short outings where he could try to build some kind of connection. It wasn't much, but it was something. Amelia didn't object, but she didn't show much excitement either. As they sat on a bench, James noticed the way she kept glancing at him, like she was sizing him up, deciding if he was worth her trust. Laura was a few steps away, standing with her arms folded, her gaze flickering between him and Amelia. James could tell she was keeping a close eye on him, making sure he didn't break any promises. He glanced at Amelia, trying to break the silence. "Do you like coming to the park?" She nodded, but her response was almost mechanical. "It's nice," she said, her voice soft. James smiled, trying to make the moment feel less forced. "What's your favorite part? The swings? The slide?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes drifting to the other children playing nearby. James could see that she wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the idea of letting him into her world seemed like a foreign concept to her. After a long pause, Amelia finally spoke, her voice small but steady. "I like the swings." James's heart warmed a little at that. It was a start. "I'll push you, if you want," he offered. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay." They moved to the swings, and James gave her a gentle push. As he stood there, watching her swing back and forth, he realized how much he had missed. The simple, quiet moments. The ones he had never thought twice about before. Laura approached him, standing beside him as they watched Amelia. There was something about her silence, the way she simply observed without offering judgment, that made James feel like she was still holding a piece of herself back. "How's she doing?" he asked, his eyes still on Amelia. "She's getting better," Laura replied. "It's just going to take time. She's cautious about everyone, especially men. She doesn't remember you, James. You've been a stranger to her, and that's not something she can just forget." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had never been a stranger to Amelia, but now, that's exactly what he was. He had to earn his place in her life, no matter how long it took. "I'm trying, Laura. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not giving up on her," he said, his voice firm, though the uncertainty lingered. "I'm here for both of you, if you'll let me." Laura turned to look at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though searching for any signs of deceit. "You don't get to just walk in and expect everything to be fine. I'm not going to let you hurt her, James. Not again." "I don't want to hurt either of you," he replied quietly, the sincerity in his words ringing clear. "I just need a chance. I'll prove I'm not going anywhere." Laura exhaled slowly, her face softening for just a moment before she turned her attention back to Amelia. "It's not just about you proving something to me. It's about proving it to her. She needs to know you'll be there. She needs to know you'll stay." James swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, that every step would be a battle. But he was willing to fight for it. He had to be. As they stood in silence, watching Amelia swing higher, James felt something shift within him. It wasn't just the desire to fix the past, it was the understanding that he couldn't go back and change what had happened. He could only move forward, slowly and carefully, building the kind of relationship he had once thought he didn't need. And maybe, just maybe, he could build a family out of the pieces he had broken. James woke up early the next morning, the weight of his thoughts heavy on his chest. He had spent the entire night turning over his conversation with Laura, his mind racing with questions, doubts, and the overwhelming desire to prove himself. He knew that if he was ever going to make things right, he couldn't just continue to show up. He had to do something that would let Laura, and especially Amelia, know that he was committed to being there for them, no matter the cost. The next few days were a mixture of slow progress and awkward silences. He had been visiting them almost every afternoon, spending time with Amelia, but he still felt like an outsider in their world. There were moments of connection, fleeting moments where he could see Amelia starting to warm up to him, like when she asked him to play a game of checkers or when she smiled at something he said. But those moments were few, and each time they ended, there was a sense of distance that he couldn't quite bridge. James had hoped that time would heal the initial awkwardness, but what he didn't expect was how deeply his absence had shaped Amelia's world. She was a quiet, introspective child, and the more he tried to engage with her, the more he realized that the years of not being there had left a scar on their relationship. He had to prove to her that he was trustworthy, not just through words, but through action. He couldn't expect her to just accept him back into her life. It was one afternoon when he finally realized how much work he had ahead of him. He had brought Amelia to a small art gallery, something he thought she might enjoy. She was quiet as they walked through the exhibits, her gaze fixed on the paintings with a quiet intensity. He noticed that she wasn't speaking much, and every now and then, she would glance up at him with a look that was hard to read. "Do you like this one?" James asked, pointing to a large abstract painting on the wall. Amelia looked at it for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly as she thought. "It's big," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James smiled. "It is big, isn't it? Sometimes the bigger the painting, the more space it takes up in your mind." He paused, hoping she might say more, but she just nodded, her eyes drifting back to the painting. He noticed that every time he tried to talk to her, she would offer short, polite responses, but there was no real conversation. It was like she was still keeping him at arm's length, unwilling to fully engage. He knew he needed to try harder, but he also knew he couldn't force her to open up. He had to let her come to him in her own time. After the gallery, they went for ice cream, something Amelia had always enjoyed. It was a simple outing, but for some reason, today it felt different. As they sat down at a small table, James noticed how carefully Amelia was eating her ice cream, as if every bite was measured. She was always so composed, so restrained. He had expected her to be more playful, more open, but instead, she was quiet, her gaze fixed on the melting ice cream in front of her. "Are you okay?" James asked gently, leaning forward. Amelia looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and thoughtful. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked the usual conviction. James could feel the wall between them, a barrier that he had to break down if he wanted to be a part of her life. He reached out, tapping the side of his ice cream cup. "You know, you don't have to be so careful with it. It's just ice cream." Amelia's lips twitched into a small smile, but it faded quickly. She set her spoon down and looked at him directly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. James blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "Doing what? Why are you here? Why do you want to be my dad?" she asked, her eyes searching his face, almost as if she was testing him. He felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of the question heavier than he expected. He had never really thought about how to explain this to her, but he knew he had to be honest. "Because I should have been here before. I should have been there for you from the beginning. But I wasn't, and I can't change that. All I can do is try to be here now, try to be the father you deserve." Amelia didn't respond immediately. She picked up her spoon again and took another small bite of her ice cream, her face still serious. James watched her, waiting for her to say something more, but she didn't. The silence between them was heavy, and for a moment, he wondered if this was it, if he had said the wrong thing, if he had pushed her too far. But then, after a long pause, Amelia spoke again. "I don't know if I believe you," she said quietly. "You weren't here before. And now you want to be here. But what if you just go away again?" Her words stung, more than he expected, but they were true. She had no reason to believe him. He had failed her before, and now he had to earn back her trust. "I'm not going anywhere, Amelia," he said, his voice firm, though the uncertainty lingered in his chest. "I'll be here, no matter what." She looked at him for a moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. It wasn't a full embrace, but it was a step forward. It was the first time she had really acknowledged him as her father. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to him. As they finished their ice cream in silence, James realized that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do, so much more to prove. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path, even if it was a long one. And he was willing to walk it, no matter what it took. James could feel the weight of each passing day, the quiet progress he had made with Amelia and Laura hanging like a fragile thread. Things were better than they had been at the start, but he knew there was still so much work to be done. The relationship between him and his daughter had started to form, but it was tentative, like a plant still growing its roots. Amelia had begun to show more trust in him, but it was clear that she wasn't entirely convinced. She still kept her distance, never completely letting him in. He spent the next few weeks trying to be a constant presence in their lives, but it wasn't easy. Every time he thought they were getting closer, some small moment would remind him of how much time he had lost, how far he still had to go. Amelia would still give him one-word answers, still watch him from a distance when they were together, and still keep her emotions guarded. James was patient, but sometimes it felt like he was running a race with no finish line in sight. One day, he decided to take them both to the zoo. It was something simple, something he hoped would help them bond without any pressure. Laura seemed hesitant at first, but after some gentle encouragement, she agreed. The day was sunny, the kind of bright, warm day that felt like it would stretch on forever, and James knew that they needed to enjoy moments like this, not rush through them. As they walked through the zoo, James noticed how different Amelia was today. She seemed a little more open, a little less withdrawn. She laughed as they watched the monkeys swing from tree to tree, her eyes wide with amusement. She pointed excitedly at the lions in the next exhibit, and for the first time, James saw the spark of childlike wonder in her that he had longed to see. It made his heart swell with something he couldn't quite explain, an overwhelming sense of both joy and regret. Joy, because he could finally be a part of her life, and regret, because he knew how many years he had missed. After spending hours wandering through the zoo, they sat on a bench, the sun beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over everything. Amelia was sitting between James and Laura, and James couldn't help but notice how natural the moment felt. There was a sense of ease between them now, something that had been lacking at the start. Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder as she watched the animals, and though she didn't say anything, the small gesture felt like a silent acknowledgement that she was starting to accept him in her own way. Laura, who had been quiet throughout most of the day, turned to James. There was something in her expression that caught him off guard. She looked softer, less guarded than she had in the past, but there was also something else, something that made her look as though she was grappling with a decision, something important that she was ready to say but didn't know how. James turned to her, sensing the shift in the air. "What is it?" he asked gently. Laura hesitated, her eyes flicking to Amelia before looking back at him. "I've been thinking a lot, James. About us. About what you said, that you're not going anywhere. I've seen the effort you're making with Amelia, and I've seen how she's starting to trust you. But I'm still afraid." She paused, as though weighing her words carefully. "I'm afraid that you'll leave again, that you'll get too busy with your work and forget about her. And I can't let her go through that again." James felt a knot tighten in his chest. He understood her fear completely. He knew what it was like to be absent, to regret lost time. But hearing Laura express her doubts made him realize just how fragile the foundation they were building was. He had to prove to her, not just through words but through actions, that he was here for the long haul. That he wasn't going to abandon them. "I get it, Laura," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I know I've failed you both before. I know that I've been absent, and I can't change that. But I'm here now. I don't want to walk away from this, from her. I'm going to show you both that I can be the man I should have been all along. I'm not leaving. Not again." Laura's eyes softened, though she still looked uncertain. "I hope you mean that, James. I really do. Because if you hurt her again, I won't be able to forgive you." James nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand. And I'll prove it to you." Every day. Amelia, who had been silent throughout their conversation, suddenly looked up at James, her blue eyes searching his face. She didn't say anything, but for the first time, James saw something different in her gaze. It wasn't quite trust, not fully yet, but it was something. It was the beginning of acceptance. As the evening wore on and they headed back to the car, James walked with a new sense of determination. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt, but he also knew that he was on the right path. He was ready to do whatever it took to earn their trust, to prove to both Laura and Amelia that he was committed to being the father he should have always been. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope that he could build something real, a family. The weeks that followed were filled with small victories and quiet setbacks, but James began to feel like he was slowly finding his place in the lives of Laura and Amelia. He spent more time with them, trying to keep things simple and natural, letting their relationship evolve at its own pace. They had gone on walks together, spent afternoons at the park, and even visited Amelia's school for a small event she had invited him to. Each time, James noticed that Amelia was warming up to him, a little more each day. She wasn't as distant as she had been in the beginning, and though she still held back in certain moments, there was a softness in her demeanor that he hadn't seen before. But just as things began to feel somewhat normal, doubt started to creep in. James began to wonder if he was pushing too hard, if his presence was still something Amelia was getting used to. She had accepted him into her world, but did she truly see him as her father? Could she ever truly accept him, knowing how much he had missed? One evening, as they were sitting in the living room after dinner, Amelia asked a question that struck James to his core. "Why didn't you want to be my dad before?" she asked, her voice small, almost shy. James froze, the words catching in his throat. He had been waiting for this moment, for her to confront him about his absence, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to respond. He glanced at Laura, who was sitting across from them, her eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to answer. I was wrong," James began, his voice steady but filled with regret. "I wasn't ready to be a father, Amelia. I wasn't ready for the responsibility, and I let that stop me from being there for you. And I know that was a mistake. A huge mistake." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face, as if trying to read the truth in his expression. James could feel the weight of her gaze, the silent judgment, and it made him feel like he was standing in front of her as an imposter, someone who didn't deserve to be called her father. "But you're here now," she said quietly, her voice almost hopeful. "Does that mean you'll stay?" James felt his chest tighten. "Yes, Amelia. I'm here to stay. I won't leave you again." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. It was a small thing, barely perceptible, but it was there. She hadn't forgiven him completely, but she was starting to let him in. After that night, things between them began to shift. James started to feel like he was no longer just a guest in their lives. They had spent more time together, family dinners, weekend outings, and quiet evenings at home, and with each passing day, Amelia seemed to grow more comfortable with him. She began asking questions about his work, his life, even his childhood, and although it was still slow going, James couldn't help but feel a growing sense of connection. But as much as things had improved, he couldn't ignore the fact that Laura remained cautious. She was watching him, always waiting for him to slip up, always holding a part of herself back. James understood why. He had been absent for so long, and no amount of good intentions could erase the past. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could prove to her that he was different now. He was committed. One evening, as they sat in the living room after Amelia had gone to bed, Laura turned to James. There was a look in her eyes, serious, almost wary. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, her voice low. "About staying. About being here for both of us." James felt his heart race. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Laura would decide if she could trust him again, if she could let him truly be part of their lives. "I'm not asking for everything to be perfect," James said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know I've made mistakes, and I know that you have every reason to be cautious. But I want to prove to you that I'm here. For both of you." Laura took a deep breath, her gaze flickering to the floor before meeting his eyes again. "It's not about proving it to me," she said softly. "It's about proving it to her. Emilia needs stability. She needs to know that she can count on you. Not just for a few weeks, not just for a month, but for the rest of her life. And I need to know that, too." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I get it. I know that trust isn't something you can just give away. But I'm not going anywhere. I will be here for both of you, no matter what. I'll prove it, day by day." Laura looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know if I can forgive you for the past, James. I don't know if I can let go of the anger I've held on to for so long. But I'll give you a chance. For her sake, and for yours." Her words hit James like a wave, overwhelming him with gratitude and relief. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't expected this, her willingness to try, to see if he could truly change. "Thank you," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Laura didn't say anything more, but she reached out and placed her hand on his, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, but it was something. It was a step forward. That night, as James lay in bed, he couldn't help but think about the road ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. But he was determined. He wasn't just fighting for his place in Laura and Emilia's life, he was fighting for a chance to be a father, to be someone who could be counted on. And no matter what happened, he would give everything he had to make sure they knew they could count on him. The weeks passed, and slowly, the relationship between James, Laura, and Emilia began to solidify in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't without its challenges, there were still moments of silence, of hesitation, of awkwardness, but there were also moments of connection. It was as if they were learning to trust each other again, step by step, through simple actions and shared experiences. James spent more time with Emilia, taking her to soccer games, attending her school plays, and reading her favorite books before bed. With each passing day, she seemed to soften, to warm up to him in ways that made his heart swell with hope. Laura, however, was still cautious. She watched him, waiting for him to prove that he wasn't going to walk away again. Every day with her was a careful dance, one step forward, two steps back, as if they were both testing the waters, unsure if they were ready to fully commit. James knew that. He could feel it in the way she sometimes pulled back, in the way she still kept part of herself hidden. It wasn't distrust, it was just her way of protecting herself and Emilia, of making sure that they didn't get hurt again. But as time went on, James could see the changes in her, too. The walls that she had carefully built around herself were slowly starting to come down, brick by brick. It wasn't fast, but it was steady, and it was enough. He had come to realize that love wasn't just about grand gestures or sweeping declarations, it was in the small moments, the quiet words, the understanding that developed over time. One Saturday afternoon, after a long week of work, James invited Laura and Emilia to a small picnic in the park. It wasn't anything elaborate, just sandwiches, fruit, and a blanket under a tree. But it was something he had been looking forward to, a chance for all of them to relax and enjoy each other's company without the pressure of daily life. Emilia was excited as they set up the picnic, running around in circles, her laughter filling the air. James watched her with a sense of wonder, amazed at how quickly she had changed, how much closer she had become. He could see the joy in her eyes now, the trust in her smile. She wasn't the same distant little girl who had barely spoken to him weeks ago. She was opening up, and it filled him with a sense of accomplishment. But he knew the real work was still ahead. As they ate, they talked about small things, school, plans for the summer, favorite books, but every so often, their conversations would linger, and James could feel the quiet tension between him and Laura. He knew she wasn't fully convinced yet, and that was okay. They had both been through so much, and it would take time for their relationship to fully heal. But then, as the afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, something shifted. Amelia, who had been running around, stopped suddenly and turned to face them. She walked up to James, her small hands clasped together nervously in front of her. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm glad you're here." The words were simple, but they hit James like a wave, overwhelming him with emotion. His heart raced as he looked at her, his throat tightening. She had called him Dad. She had said it without hesitation, without doubt. And in that moment, everything he had worked for, everything he had fought for, seemed worth it. Laura, who had been watching from the blanket, looked up at him, her expression softening. For the first time in a long time, James saw a flicker of something like pride, something like trust, pass between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. James smiled at Amelia, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad I'm here too, sweetheart." As the evening wore on, they sat together in the fading light, the world around them quieting down as the night approached. Amelia lay down on the blanket, her head resting in Laura's lap as they both watched the stars begin to appear in the sky. James sat beside them, his arm around Laura's shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been doubts, misunderstandings, and moments when it felt like everything was slipping away. But in this small, quiet moment, with Amelia and Laura beside him, James realized that he had found something that was worth every sacrifice he had made. He had found a family, and for the first time in years, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The future was still uncertain. There were still moments of doubt, still things to work through. But for now, as they sat there together in the soft glow of the evening, James knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going anywhere. And neither was his family. The ending of this story, for me, is deeply moving and reflects the theme of redemption, second chances, and the complexity of relationships. James's journey from a distant, career-focused man to a devoted father is not only about proving his worth to his daughter, but also about earning the trust of Laura, his former partner. The slow but steady progress between James and Amelia, as well as the gradual reopening of trust with Laura, shows that time and actions, rather than words alone, can heal past wounds. The moment when James truly becomes a father in Amelia's eyes, despite all the years lost, is powerful and touching. The acceptance he finds with her and with Laura is the culmination of his efforts, and it's clear that he has learned more about what truly matters in life. The idea that family is built not just by blood, but by actions, responsibility, and love, gives the ending a sense of fulfillment and hope. It's a happy ending, not because everything is perfect, but because James has finally come to terms with his past mistakes, and he is ready to take on the challenges ahead with a sense of purpose. The idea of taking a family vacation as a new start reflects a new chapter in their lives, one where James is no longer running from his responsibilities but embracing them fully. The story leaves us with a sense of renewal and the hope that, no matter how much time has passed, there's always a chance to make things right and rebuild what's been broken. Dr. Carter was used to handling any challenge. His workday was moving along as usual until a little girl walked into his office. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with determination and pain. As if summoning all her courage, she spoke 3 words that stopped time. Carter realized he would never be the same again, because those words changed everything. Now it's your turn, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, there are even more inspiring and incredible stories coming your way. Dr. Carter was the kind of man who inspired confidence the moment he stepped into a room. Tall, with a composed demeanor and an air of quiet authority, he exuded the calm assurance of someone who had seen and managed it all. His colleagues often said he had a gift, a natural ability to diffuse even the most tense situations with a reassuring glance or a few carefully chosen words. In the hospital, he was more than a doctor, he was a figure of trust and stability, a man others looked to for guidance and support. Each morning, Dr. Carter's routine unfolded with precision. He arrived early, his neatly pressed white coat a symbol of his commitment to the profession. He made his rounds with an unhurried grace, speaking to patients with genuine warmth and listening intently to their concerns. Whether it was a routine checkup or a critical emergency, he approached every case with the same level of dedication and focus. His reputation as a skilled and compassionate physician was well earned, and patients often requested him by name, believing that if anyone could help, it was Dr. Carter. In the break room, he was equally respected. While others occasionally vented about the pressures of the job, Dr. Carter rarely showed signs of stress. It wasn't that he didn't feel the weight of his responsibilities, he simply managed them differently. Years of experience had taught him that panic and haste were the enemies of good medicine. Instead, he operated with a steady hand and a clear mind, qualities that made him invaluable in moments of crisis. Nurses admired him for his professionalism, while younger doctors sought his mentorship, eager to learn from someone who made even the most complex procedures seem routine. But Dr. Carter's strength wasn't just in his medical expertise. It was in the way he connected with people. He remembered not just his patients' names, but their stories, the worried father whose son needed surgery, the elderly woman who brightened at the mention of her grandchildren, the teenager hiding his fear behind a brave face. To Dr. Carter, every case was personal. He saw his patients not as problems to be solved but as lives to be cared for, a philosophy that set him apart in a field often overwhelmed by bureaucracy and clinical detachment. On this particular day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The hospital hummed with its usual rhythm, a blend of controlled chaos and quiet determination. Dr. Carter moved through his tasks with the same measured pace as always, unaware that this day would be unlike any other. It was a day that would test not only his professionalism but also his ability to navigate the unpredictable twists of human relationships. And though he didn't know it yet, the events set in motion would challenge everything he thought he knew about trust, honesty, and the boundaries of his own compassion. It started as an ordinary afternoon in the emergency department, a steady flow of patients, each case demanding attention, yet nothing beyond the usual. Dr. Carter had just finished stitching a wound when the sound of hurried footsteps filled the corridor. A nurse wheeled in a little girl, her arm wrapped clumsily in a makeshift sling. Tears streaked her pale face, her eyes red and puffy from crying, but there was something about her expression that made Dr. Carter pause. Beneath the obvious fear and pain, there was a quiet determination, a kind of strength that seemed remarkable for a child her age. The girl's name was Emily, no older than 9, with blonde hair pulled into a messy braid and cheeks smudged with dirt. Her mother trailed close behind, her voice quivering with panic as she explained what had happened. She fell off the monkey bars, the mother said, clutching her own hands nervously. She landed wrong, and, oh, God, her arm. Her voice cracked, but Emily interrupted her. "I'm fine," the girl said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She cradled her injured arm protectively, the pain evident in her tight-lipped expression, but she met Dr. Carter's gaze with a surprising steadiness. Dr. Carter knelt to her level, his calm presence easing some of the tension in the room. "Hi, Emily," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I'm Dr. Carter. I hear you've had a bit of a tumble, but don't worry, we're going to take great care of you." Emily nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, as though refusing to cry anymore. "It's not that bad," she insisted, though her wince as she shifted her arms suggested otherwise. He smiled softly. "I like your bravery, but let's take a look and make sure everything's okay. It might hurt a little at first, but I promise I'll be as gentle as possible." Emily nodded again, this time more reluctantly. As Dr. Carter examined her arm, he noticed the way she clenched her tiny fists, her knuckles turning white as she braced herself. Her mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands, but Emily remained stoic, refusing to shed another tear. It wasn't the typical reaction he saw in children, and it caught his attention. Most kids her age cried, screamed, or begged for the pain to stop. But Emily, she seemed determined to endure it. "Emily," he said gently, "you're one tough cookie. Do you play sports? You remind me of some of the strongest athletes I've treated." That brought the faintest smile to her face, though it flickered quickly back to a grimace as he carefully aligned her arm for an X-ray. "I like soccer," she murmured. "But I don't want to miss school. We have a science project due tomorrow." Dr. Carter chuckled softly, his admiration for her growing. "That's some dedication. I think your teacher would understand if you take a little break." As the X-ray results confirmed a clean fracture, Dr. Carter talked Emily through every step of the process. He explained how her arm would heal and reassured her that she would be back on the soccer field in no time. When it came time to set the bone and place the cast, he worked with a precision born of years of experience but infused it with a gentleness that immediately put her at ease. He spoke softly, keeping her distracted with questions about her favorite science topics and her soccer team, and before she knew it, the hardest part was over. When the cast was finally in place, a bright pink one she had chosen herself, Emily looked up at him with wide eyes. "Thanks, Dr. Carter," she said quietly, her voice now steady. "You didn't make it scary." The sincerity in her words caught him off guard. It was a small moment, but it stayed with him, the way her resilience and quiet gratitude shone through despite the pain she'd endured. As Emily left with her mother, clutching a sticker the nurse had given her and promising to show off her cast to her friends, Dr. Carter felt a flicker of something unusual. He didn't know it yet, but this little girl had already begun to leave an impression on him, one that would ripple far beyond the confines of that hospital room. Emily sat on the edge of the hospital bench, swinging her legs lightly as she waited for her mother to finish signing the discharge papers. Her bright pink cast rested carefully on her lap, and although her arms still ached, she was proud of how brave she'd been. The memory of Dr. Carter's kind smile and soft voice was fresh in her mind, and for the first time that day, she felt safe. The hospital bustled around her, nurses rushing by, patients being wheeled through the corridors, and the rhythmic beep of monitors echoing faintly. Emily glanced around, her curious eyes taking in every detail. It was then she spotted him, Dr. Carter, standing by the reception desk. She was about to wave when she noticed he wasn't alone. In his hands was a small bouquet of white lilies, their petals fresh and delicate. Beside him stood a nurse, a tall woman with sleek brown hair tied back into a perfect ponytail. Emily tilted her head, intrigued. Dr. Carter was smiling, but it wasn't the same professional smile he'd given her earlier. This one seemed softer, almost shy. He handed the flowers to the nurse, who laughed lightly and accepted them. Then, to Emily's surprise, he leaned in and gave the nurse a quick, warm hug. Emily's brow furrowed. She wasn't sure what she was seeing, but something about the moment made her linger. Dr. Carter looked different, more vulnerable, less composed. The nurse blushed as she held the flowers, her smile lingering long after the hug ended. They exchanged a few words that Emily couldn't hear, and then the nurse glanced around quickly before slipping the lilies into a vase at the counter. It wasn't unusual for adults to act in ways Emily didn't fully understand, but this felt different. There was a kind of secretiveness in the way the nurse glanced over her shoulder, as if she didn't want to be seen. Emily's gaze followed her as she walked down the hall, the flowers in her hands swaying slightly. Dr. Carter stayed where he was, watching her leave with an expression Emily couldn't quite place. It wasn't just happiness, it seemed tinged with something else, something deeper. For the next few minutes, Emily stayed unusually still, her gaze darting between Dr. Carter and the nurse whenever they appeared in the same space. She didn't mean to spy, but her curiosity got the better of her. It wasn't often that she saw adults acting so personal. Most of the time, grown-ups seemed busy or distant, but this was different. She couldn't help but wonder what the flowers meant, and why Dr. Carter, who seemed so serious and professional, had given them to this nurse with such a tender expression. Her mother finally returned, paperwork in hand, and called her name. "Emily, time to go." But Emily's attention lingered for a moment longer. As she stood to leave, she watched the nurse walk down another corridor. This time, the nurse stopped abruptly near a tall, dark-haired man in scrubs. Emily didn't know who he was, but the way the nurse smiled at him was strikingly familiar. It was the same smile she'd just given Dr. Carter. The nurse leaned in close, her hand brushing the man's arm, and Emily thought she saw something that looked an awful lot like a kiss. Emily blinked, unsure of what she had just witnessed. She turned back toward Dr. Carter, who was already busy with another patient, seemingly unaware of what had just happened. Her chest tightened slightly as she followed her mother out of the hospital. She didn't fully understand why, but she felt a strange unease. Something about the way the nurse had acted didn't sit right with her. She couldn't stop wondering if Dr. Carter knew what she had just seen, or if he needed to. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. The flowers, the hug, and then that fleeting moment when the nurse had leaned into another man, her smile just as warm and genuine as it had been with Dr. Carter. Something about it gnawed at Emily's thoughts, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just confusing, it felt wrong, as though she'd stumbled onto a secret she wasn't supposed to know. The memory replayed in her mind over and over as she sat in the hospital's small waiting area. Her mother had gone back to the counter to ask a final question, leaving Emily with nothing to do but watch the world move around her. The corridors seemed busier now, full of people with stories she could only guess at, but her eyes kept drifting back to the nurse. She spotted her down the hall, standing by a supply closet, laughing softly with the tall, dark-haired man. Emily's stomach churned as she realized they were the same two people she'd seen before. She leaned forward slightly, trying to hear their conversation, but their voices were too low to make out. Instead, she watched as the man rested a hand on the nurse's shoulder, his thumb brushing gently across her collarbone. Then it happened, the moment Emily could hardly believe even as she saw it. The nurse tilted her head toward him, her lips meeting his in a soft, quick kiss. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was enough to make Emily's heart race. This was the same nurse who had been smiling at Dr. Carter just minutes ago, accepting flowers and a hug like they were meant just for her. Emily's chest tightened. Dr. Carter had been so kind to her, so thoughtful and gentle. She'd seen how he looked at that nurse, like she was someone important, someone he cared about deeply. And now, here she was, acting like none of it mattered. Emily clenched her uninjured hand into a fist, unsure what to feel, anger, confusion, or just a deep sense of unfairness. What was she supposed to do with this? Adults were complicated, she'd known that for a while. They had secrets and rules she didn't always understand. Maybe this was one of those things she wasn't supposed to get involved in. Maybe it was none of her business. But the thought of leaving without saying anything made her feel uneasy, almost sick. Dr. Carter didn't deserve this. He'd been so good to her, making sure her arm would heal, talking to her like she was someone who mattered. The words began forming in her head before she could stop them. "She's cheating on you." It sounded harsh, too harsh for someone her age to say, but it also felt true. Still, the idea of actually saying it out loud made her stomach twist in knots. Her mother's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Emily, let's go." Emily stood, her cast feeling heavier than before, and followed her mother toward the exit. As they walked through the main corridor, she glanced back one last time. Dr. Carter was standing at the far end, clipboard in hand, his expression calm and focused as always. The nurse was nowhere in sight. Emily bit her lip, the conflict inside her growing stronger with each step. Should she tell him? Would he even believe her? Or was this one of those things better left alone? For the first time in her young life, Emily felt the weight of a moral dilemma that no one could solve for her. She didn't have the words to explain it, but deep down, she knew this wasn't just about what she'd seen, it was about what kind of person she wanted to be. The office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound as Emily stood just outside the door. Her heart pounded in her chest, her casted arm hanging heavy at her side. She clenched her uninjured hand into a fist, trying to summon the courage she wasn't sure she had. Her mother had gone to the car to grab her phone, leaving Emily with a few stolen moments of freedom. She had made her decision. She would speak to Dr. Carter. She pushed the door open timidly, her small frame nearly swallowed by the heavy wooden door. Dr. Carter looked up from his desk, his expression softening when he saw her. "Emily," he said warmly, setting aside a stack of patient charts. "Is everything okay? Did your arm start hurting again?" Emily hesitated, her throat suddenly dry. She hadn't expected him to be so kind, so calm. The image of his smile earlier, the way he'd handed the flowers to the nurse, flashed through her mind. It made this even harder. "No, my arm's fine," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something." Dr. Carter leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. His brow furrowed slightly, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" he asked gently, his tone encouraging her to continue. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the floor. Her legs felt wobbly, and for a moment, she considered running out of the room and pretending this never happened. But the image of the nurse kissing that other man kept flashing in her mind, and with it came the memory of Dr. Carter's kindness, the way he talked to her like she was important. He deserved to know. Taking a deep breath, she looked up and met his eyes. "She's cheating on you," Emily said, her voice trembling but clear. The room seemed to freeze. Dr. Carter's expression shifted instantly, the warmth draining from his face as confusion took its place. "What?" he asked, leaning forward slightly as though he hadn't heard her correctly. Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay rooted in place. "The nurse," she said, her voice quieter now. "I saw her. She kissed another man. I thought you should know." Dr. Carter blinked, his expression caught between disbelief and something else, discomfort, maybe even embarrassment. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his mind clearly racing to process the words. "Emily," he finally said, his voice measured but cautious. "Are you sure about what you saw?" "Yes," she said firmly, the fear in her chest giving way to a strange sense of determination. "I saw it. She was with someone else after you gave her flowers." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. For a man who always seemed calm and collected, he suddenly looked vulnerable, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. I see," he murmured, his voice more to himself than to her. He sat there for a moment longer, staring at the desk in front of him, before finally looking back at her. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly, his tone laced with an emotion Emily couldn't quite place. "That was a very brave thing to do." Emily nodded, unsure of what else to say. She had expected anger or denial, maybe even frustration at her for meddling. But Dr. Carter just looked sad. The kind of sadness that came from knowing someone you trusted might not be who you thought they were. "I don't know what I'll do yet," he added after a pause, as though trying to reassure her. "But I'm glad you told me the truth." As she left the office, Emily felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. She had done what she thought was right, but the weight of her words lingered heavily on her shoulders. Behind her, Dr. Carter sat in silence, his thoughts swirling, the three words replaying in his mind, "She's cheating on you." It was a moment that neither of them would forget, a moment that had changed everything. The air in Dr. Carter's office felt heavier than usual as he sat at his desk, replaying Emily's words over and over in his mind, "She's cheating on you." At first, he had dismissed it as a misunderstanding, a child's innocent misinterpretation of adult interactions. But the sincerity in Emily's eyes, the conviction in her trembling voice, had planted a seed of doubt that refused to go away. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how much he wanted to. He tried to focus on his work, flipping through charts and scribbling notes, but his concentration was gone. His thoughts kept drifting to the nurse, Claire, and all the moments they had shared. The stolen glances in the corridors, the quiet conversations over coffee, the bouquet of flowers he'd handed her just that morning. Was it possible that those moments had meant more to him than they ever did to her? Finally, he made a decision. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, after his shift ended, he sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, debating whether to confront Claire directly. But something held him back, a nagging instinct that told him to wait, to observe before accusing. He wasn't the type to act on impulse, and this situation, as personal as it was, deserved careful consideration. The following day, Dr. Carter paid closer attention to Claire than he ever had before. Not the kind of attention born from affection, but the kind sharpened by suspicion. He noticed how her laughter seemed a little forced when she spoke to him, how she checked her phone frequently, quickly sliding it back into her pocket whenever he walked by. It wasn't much, but it was enough to unsettle him further. It was during lunch that his suspicions began to solidify. He had taken his usual seat in the staff lounge when he noticed Claire sitting in the far corner, her back to him, speaking in hushed tones to someone he couldn't see. She leaned in close, her body language far more intimate than professional. A moment later, the person she was speaking to, a man in scrubs, reached across the table and touched her hand. She laughed, and though the sound was faint, it sent a sharp pang through Carter's chest. He told himself to let it go, to walk away, but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. Against his better judgment, he lingered just long enough to see the man stand and lean down toward Claire. Their faces were close, too close, and then it happened. A kiss. It was quick, almost casual, but it confirmed everything Emily had said. Dr. Carter's stomach churned as he turned and walked out of the lounge, his mind racing. He felt a storm of emotions building inside him, anger, betrayal, humiliation. He had trusted Claire, let her into his life, even begun to imagine a future with her. And now, all of it felt like a lie. Later that day, he decided to confront her. His voice was calm but firm as he asked her directly about the other man. For a moment, she hesitated, her expression faltering, and in that hesitation, he saw the truth. She tried to explain, offering weak excuses about misunderstandings and professional relationships, but her words only made the betrayal cut deeper. "Claire," he said, his voice low but steady, "don't insult me by pretending this is nothing. I deserve honesty, at the very least." Her silence was deafening. As the reality of the situation sank in, Dr. Carter felt a deep sense of disappointment, not just in her, but in himself for not seeing the signs sooner. He realized that the affection she had shown him, the moments they'd shared, had been carefully calculated. She wasn't interested in him, she was interested in what he could provide. The thought made his stomach turn. That evening, alone in his apartment, Dr. Carter sat in the dim light of his living room, the weight of the day pressing heavily on him. He thought about Emily, her bravery in telling him what she had seen, and how her words, as painful as they were, had spared him from further humiliation. As hurt as he felt, there was also a strange sense of relief that he now knew the truth, even if it wasn't the truth he had wanted. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also gave him clarity. Claire had been a distraction, a fleeting infatuation. What he truly valued, honesty, trust, and kindness, was something she couldn't offer. And for the first time since hearing Emily's words, Dr. Carter began to see that this painful revelation might be a chance for a new beginning. The decision weighed heavily on Dr. Carter as he sat in his office, the faint glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The words he needed to say were clear in his mind, but forming them into sentences felt like a monumental task. Claire wasn't just a passing fling, she had been someone he thought might become a significant part of his life. Yet now, every shared moment, every kind gesture, felt hollow, tainted by what he now knew. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. How could he have been so blind? He prided himself on his ability to read people, patients, colleagues, even strangers, but with Claire, he'd let his guard down. Maybe it was her charm, her laughter, or the way she seemed to light up a room. Or maybe it was the comfort of having someone to come home to after the long, grueling hours at the hospital. Whatever it was, it had clouded his judgment, and now he had to confront the truth. The next day, Carter waited until his shift was over before approaching Claire. He found her in the staff lounge, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening in a way that now felt rehearsed to him. "Hey, you," she said, her tone light and casual, as if nothing had changed. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady but devoid of its usual warmth. Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Sure. What's up?" Carter gestured for her to follow him into a quieter hallway, away from the bustle of the hospital. Once they were alone, he took a deep breath. "Claire," he began, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About everything." Her expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Okay," she said cautiously. "I know," he said simply, the weight of those two words sinking between them. "I know about you and the other man." For a moment, her face was a perfect mask of surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to confront her. Then, the excuses began. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "He's just a friend, Carter. You're misunderstanding." "Claire," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. "Don't. I saw it. I don't need an explanation." Her mouth opened as if to protest, but she seemed to sense the futility of it. Instead, she sighed and looked away, her expression hardening. "Fine. Believe whatever you want," she muttered, her tone defensive. Carter felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of resolve. "I trusted you," he said, his voice quieter now. "I thought we had something real. But I can see now that I was wrong. And honestly, I think you were just using me." At that, Claire's eyes narrowed. "Using you? For what?" she snapped, her tone sharp. "You think I'm some kind of gold digger?" "I think you wanted what I could give you," he replied calmly. "And I don't blame you for wanting stability or comfort. But I can't be in a relationship that's built on lies." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, the silence filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. Finally, Claire crossed her arms and shrugged. "If that's how you feel, then fine. Maybe it's better this way." Carter nodded, the finality of her words solidifying his decision. "Take care of yourself, Claire," he said softly before turning and walking away. As he left, a strange mix of emotions washed over him. There was sadness, of course, a lingering ache for what could have been. But there was also relief. He had escaped something toxic, something that could have drained him emotionally, financially, and even professionally. And for that, he owed a debt of gratitude to the most unexpected person. Later that evening, as Carter sat alone in his apartment, he thought about Emily. Her bravery, her honesty, and her willingness to speak up despite her fear had saved him from further heartache. He realized that, in her own way, she had taught him an important lesson: the truth, no matter how painful, was always worth facing. For the first time in days, Carter felt a sense of clarity. The breakup, though painful, was the right decision. It wasn't just about ending a relationship, it was about regaining his self-respect and refusing to settle for anything less than genuine love and trust. And with that realization, he began to feel the faint stirrings of hope for what the future might hold. Dr. Carter walked through the hospital gift shop with an uncharacteristic uncertainty, scanning the shelves for something that might say what words alone couldn't. It wasn't every day that he found himself indebted to a child, but Emily wasn't just any child. Her courage had been the light he didn't know he needed, cutting through the shadows of deception and saving him from what could have been a far worse heartbreak. He had already decided he needed to thank her properly, but figuring out how to do it felt strangely daunting. Finally, his eyes landed on a box of chocolates shaped like animals. The bright packaging and playful design seemed perfect for a young girl, and he could almost picture Emily's shy smile as she opened it. But chocolates alone didn't feel enough. His gaze wandered to the shelves of toys, and a plush teddy bear with a pink bow caught his attention. It was simple yet comforting, something he hoped would bring her a little joy. With his selections in hand, he made his way to the cashier, determined to express his gratitude in a way that felt meaningful. Later that afternoon, he found Emily and her mother sitting in the outpatient waiting area. Emily's arm was propped on a pillow, her pink cast standing out against her small frame. She was engrossed in a book, her legs swinging idly beneath the chair. Her mother looked up first, her face lighting up when she saw Dr. Carter approaching. "Dr. Carter," her mother said warmly, nudging Emily gently. "Look who's here." Emily glanced up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Hi, Dr. Carter," she said, her voice soft but cheerful. "Is everything okay?" "Better than okay," he replied with a smile. He crouched down to her level, holding out the box of chocolates and the teddy bear. "These are for you." Her eyes widened even more, darting from the gifts to his face. "For me? Why?" Carter chuckled lightly, setting the items on the chair beside her. "Because you did something very brave, Emily. You told me the truth, even though it wasn't easy. And that truth saved me from making a big mistake." Emily tilted her head, her expression a mix of curiosity and pride. "You mean, about the nurse?" He nodded, his tone gentle but sincere. "Yes. What you told me wasn't easy to hear, but it was the truth I needed. You helped me see something I might have missed, and because of that, I was able to make the right decision." Emily picked up the teddy bear, hugging it to her chest as a small smile spread across her face. "I just thought you should know," she said simply. "It didn't seem fair." "It wasn't," Carter agreed, his voice softening. "And I want you to know how much I appreciate your honesty. Not everyone would have had the courage to do what you did." Her mother chimed in, her voice filled with gratitude. "You didn't have to do this, Dr. Carter, but it means so much." Emily was worried she might have done something wrong. "Quite the opposite," Carter said, glancing at Emily. "You did something incredible, Emily. You reminded me how important it is to face the truth, even when it's hard." For a moment, the three of them sat in a comfortable silence. Emily's fingers traced the ribbon on the teddy bear, her cheeks slightly flushed from the praise. Finally, she looked up at Carter with a shy but genuine smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "For this. And for fixing my arm." Carter smiled back, his chest feeling lighter than it had in days. "You're welcome. And thank you, Emily, for being the little hero I didn't know I needed." As he stood to leave, Carter felt a sense of closure that hadn't been there before. Emily's bravery had not only saved him from deceit but also reminded him of the power of truth and the strength found in unexpected places. With a final wave, he left the waiting area, knowing that this small act of gratitude was just the beginning of a better, brighter chapter in his life. As Emily sat in the waiting area, clutching the teddy bear Dr. Carter had given her, she hesitated for a moment before looking up at him. There was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a weight that didn't belong to a girl her age. Her mother, sensing Emily's unease, leaned in. "Sweetheart, is there something you want to say?" Emily nodded slowly, her fingers fiddling with the ribbon on the teddy bear's neck. She looked at Dr. Carter, who had crouched to her level again, his expression warm and patient. "I wanted to tell you why I said what I did," she began, her voice soft but steady. "It wasn't just because I saw her with that man. It was something else. Dr. Carter tilted his head slightly, giving her his full attention. I'm listening, Emily. Take your time. She took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to let words she'd kept inside finally spill out. I don't like when people lie, she said firmly, her small hands tightening around the plush bear. I've seen what lies do. They make people hurt, and they make things worse. I didn't want you to get hurt. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of encouragement. Emily glanced at her before continuing. At my old school, she said quietly, there was this girl in my class. She always picked on me. She would say mean things, like that I didn't belong or that I wasn't good enough. She lied to the teacher once, saying I cheated on a test, and I got in trouble even though I didn't do anything wrong. Her voice wavered for a moment, but she pushed through. It wasn't just her. Other kids started doing it, too. They didn't want to be her next target, so they went along with her lies. And the more they lied, the worse it got. Every day, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dr. Carter's expression softened further, the gravity of her words sinking in. That must have been really hard, Emily, he said gently. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the bear again. It was, she admitted. But the worst part was when my teacher believed them. She didn't even ask me what happened. She just punished me. I tried to explain, but nobody listened. Her mother's eyes glistened with tears, and she gave Emily's shoulder a gentle squeeze. That's why we moved her to a new school, she added softly. It was too much for her. We needed a fresh start. Emily looked up again, her eyes now brimming with determination. That's when I promised myself I'd never let someone get away with hurting someone else if I could stop it. When I saw the nurse with that man after you gave her flowers, it reminded me of what happened to me. I didn't want her lies to hurt you like those lies hurt me. Dr. Carter felt a lump form in his throat. Emily's story was far more than he had expected, and yet it explained so much about her bravery. She had experienced betrayal and injustice in ways no child should, and instead of becoming bitter, she had chosen to stand for what was right. He marveled at her strength, her clarity of purpose. Emily, he said after a moment, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, what you did took an incredible amount of courage. I can't imagine how hard it must have been to go through what you did, but I'm so proud of you for staying true to what you believe. You've reminded me of something very important. She blinked, surprised. What's that? That honesty and doing the right thing matter, he replied. No matter how small it might seem, telling the truth can make a big difference. You showed me that, and I'll never forget it. Her lips curved into a small, shy smile. I'm glad I told you, she said quietly. Even if it was scary. As the conversation came to a close, Dr. Carter felt a profound sense of admiration for the little girl in front of him. She wasn't just brave, she was wise beyond her years, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Her story stayed with him long after she left the hospital, a reminder that even in the smallest voices, there could be immense strength and clarity. The days following his conversation with Emily marked a quiet transformation in Dr. Carter's life. The hospital buzzed with its usual energy, patients coming and going, emergencies demanding attention, but something within him had shifted. The betrayal he'd experienced still lingered, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it served as a reminder of what truly mattered: honesty, trust, and the courage to face difficult truths. Emily's story and her bravery had left an indelible mark on him. She had shown him that even the smallest voices could hold immense power, that a single moment of truth could ripple outward and change everything. He often found himself thinking about the determined look in her eyes as she told him why she had spoken up. It wasn't just her honesty that had moved him, it was her sense of justice, her refusal to let someone else suffer as she once had. With each passing day, Dr. Carter began to let go of the disappointment and resentment that had weighed him down. Claire and her deceit were no longer the center of his thoughts. Instead, he focused on the lessons he had learned and the opportunities ahead. His work at the hospital became more meaningful. Every patient interaction felt like a chance to connect, to truly make a difference. One afternoon, as he reviewed charts in his office, he noticed the teddy bear Emily had left behind during her last visit. Its pink bow was slightly crooked, and its plush fur bore a faint trace of where her small hands had gripped it. He smiled, realizing it wasn't just a toy, it was a symbol of the connection they had formed, however brief. It reminded him that even in a world full of challenges and uncertainties, small acts of kindness and courage could shine through. Carter began to reflect on his own life beyond the hospital walls. For too long, he had allowed himself to settle for relationships that lacked the honesty and depth he now knew he needed. Emily's actions had reminded him of the importance of holding himself, and others, to a higher standard. He resolved to start fresh, to seek connections rooted in mutual respect and authenticity. The turning point came one sunny afternoon when he took a rare break to sit outside in the hospital's courtyard. The warmth of the sun on his face felt like a reminder of life's simple joys. As he watched families and children move through the space, he felt a sense of hope blooming within him. The scars of the past didn't feel so heavy anymore, instead, they felt like a foundation for something stronger. Dr. Carter knew that life would never be without its challenges, but he also knew he was better equipped to face them now. Emily's bravery had reignited something within him, a belief in the power of truth, no matter how hard it might be to confront. He carried that lesson with him into every interaction, every decision, and every corner of his life. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the courtyard, Dr. Carter smiled to himself. This was his new beginning, a life built on honesty, justice, and the unwavering courage to do what was right. And though he hadn't planned it, he owed much of it to a little girl with a pink cast and a heart far braver than her years. If you've enjoyed this story of resilience, courage, and the unexpected ways life can change, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are many more inspiring and thought-provoking stories to come, and we'd love for you to be a part of the journey.